When a series has gone on for a long time, and especially if it's a yearly franchise, sooner or later you're gonna get the dreaded criticism, you know you're just buying the same game over and over again, right? When I was younger, this is what you said to people who forked over the money to play that year's Call of Duty. Nowadays, it's used for people who plunk down a full $60 for the latest FIFA or Madden. From the outside looking in, it does look like Sisyphus had it easy. At least they didn't charge him every time he dropped the ball. But even if they're similar, they'll usually try to vary up each entry to make them feel distinct even for longtime players. New Call of Duties will add new guns, game modes, maps, and stories. New sports games will add... cards. They'll add new cards. But thinking about this sort of topic got me wondering, when has that actually happened? Have developers ever tried getting away with making you pay for the exact same game multiple times? It's not an especially full list, but there are times that game developers have managed to say, yeah, you're gonna give us money again. Do I get anything? How about I give you a pop in the mouth, you little shit? Who said that? How many people here have a dog? Well, get ready to throw that thing in the fucking dirt! If you want to know how big a success Nintendogs was, look at how Ubisoft nearly ripped themselves apart to try to get a sip of that dog bowl. Pets is a series that nowadays only gets remembered as the thing that wasn't Nintendogs. Ubisoft's answer to the virtual pet craze that got reignited when Nintendogs broke down the floodgates. Nintendogs made gamers out of people who only ever saw the game over their kids' shoulders. It increased sales of the DS in Japan by 4 times in its launch week, and sold more copies than every Pokemon, Brain Age, and Mario game released on the DS except for New Super Mario Bros. It was obvious for developers to see now that people were dying to raise a fake immortal dog, and no one tried to capitalize on that harder than Ubisoft. They had previously acquired the rights to the Pets franchise, a series of games that up to that point were modest successes in the field of PC pet simulators, made on the same engine as 3D Balls, and using insider information from Santa Claus and emotional warfare by giving you the dog for free, but charging you for the food. The only lie I told in that sentence was when I said these games were a modest success. 1 million copies of their flagship game Dogs sold led the company to be bought by Mindscape and then by Ubisoft. Ubisoft was not subtle about the fact that reviving the Pets franchise was done in order to compete with Nintendogs. They wanted a piece of the pie since they felt they had baked it. They revolutionized the field of pet simulators. They really didn't. They just bought the guys who made the first 4 Pets games, published the 5th one, and then put the series on ice. Now a new pet sim was gonna blow past them? No way! In interviews with executive producer Tony Van, they laid out the plan they had for the franchise. Nintendo had them beat in terms of quality, but Nintendo couldn't beat them in terms of output. Nintendogs had been in development ever since 1997 on the N64, 8 years between pitch and release. Ubisoft wasn't willing to wait that long, and was going to use human wave tactics to try to overwhelm Nintendo. Without the console exclusivity Nintendo had, they'd be able to release a single Pets game, like Horses, on the GBA and DS, as well as the PC and PS2, covering markets Nintendo couldn't. They'd also be willing to venture further than Nintendo was by covering both dogs, cats, and hamsters, as well as more out-there animals like horses, dolphins, tigers, and monkeys. Now, between 2005 and 2011, there were 2 Nintendogs games, the one on the DS and the one on the 3DS. If you want to push it to make the next part sting a little bit less, there's technically 10. That's only if you want to count the different versions of the games as their own separate games. Nobody does that, but here we are. 2 games in 6 years. In the same time, Ubisoft released 46 Pets games! This is the conservative measure, by the way, simply going off which games shared a name. If you want to be more fair and count versions that were totally different games as their own games, the number goes up to about 53 unique Pets games. Okay, I'm 11! I can't take care of all these things! How could Ubisoft make 53 games in the same time it takes a newborn to get to first grade? Well, that's the trick, now isn't it? See, Ubisoft wouldn't actually develop many of the Pets games themselves. Sure, when things were dire, they'd step in to handle Pets Fantasy Moonlight Magic, but they didn't develop a majority of these games. That's normal. Ubisoft was as much a publisher as they were a developer at the time, so they were just contracting out developers to make these games for them. Wrong again! Ubisoft didn't even commission most of the Pets games. What they did instead was simply purchase the rights to pre-existing games, translate them into English if needed, and release them as a part of the Pets franchise. The Pets name was just that, a name slapped onto a pet game that wasn't gonna get released in America that Ubisoft could get their hands on. The original dogs for GBA and DS? That was just Japanese pet simulator Kawaii Koinu Wonderful, released the year prior in 2004. The cat version of the same game was Nakayoshi Pet Advance Series 3 Kawaii Koineko. Pets Hamster's Life 2 was Hamsters to Curaçao. The reason they were able to release so many games so consistently was because they really weren't making these games at all. In just one game release. Every version of Horses was a different game. The PC version was Pipa Funnel 3. The PS2 version was Pipa Funnel 2. The GBA version was Perften Pony Mein Gestut, and the DS version was Alexandra Letterman DS. Kingdom Hearts storyline is too complex to follow. I'm fucking dying over here trying to figure out what a horse is. This method of making games meant a lot of Pets games. A franchise meant to compete with Nintendogs as a pet sim game weren't even pet sims. Dogs 2, the sequel to Dog, was an action RPG that ends with you fighting a dragon. I've never been able to ask this genuinely. What the dog doing? That's because it's part of a totally different series developed by Yuke's, Wankodamaho no Boshi. Ubisoft released so many Pets games over those 6 years, on multiple occasions they would end up just releasing the same game twice and hoped nobody would notice. The first one they released is back with the goddamn horses, specifically with the PS2 game, Horses. This game has you attending a school for raising horses after you save one from a barn fire. You organize your classes and train your horse so you can become the top of your class and become a world-class horse. I'm bored of talking about that game and want to talk about something completely unrelated. The PC game Champion's Dream First to Ride. This is a game all about attending a school for raising horses after you save one from a barn fire. You get the point, it's the same game. Cutscenes, voice lines, activities. Only the barest of bare essentials are actually changed. The menus got a bit of an overhaul. They removed the Champion's Dream logo from the opening sequence in Horses, and certain voices got redubbed. They're not at all hard to spot though, since every voice in the game has a thick British accent, as the game was first localized to the UK from Germany. And while characters like the Principal and Mean Horse Guy have their accents, randomly you'll get somebody with no accent at all. These are even easier to spot since for some reason they also get rid of the character portraits for the characters they've redubbed.
Remember, you must take your training very seriously, for at the end of every week you will be assessed.
Drawing up your own timetable can be a lot of fun, but bear in mind that you will have to practice every discipline.
It doesn't specify anywhere that this game and Horses are the same game. This isn't a port, this isn't even a Pets game. This is a game Ubisoft managed to release twice under 2 different names and got away with. It's not unrealistic to think a girl who loves horses ends up getting both of these games and realizes all too late they're the same. The other game this happened with is Dogs 2, which is not Dogs 2, the Wii game. With the dragon, felt like bringing it up because I feel like it might not have sunk in. It's also not Dogs 2 released for the PC, which is a normal pet sim game, no dragon. It's also not Dogs 2 for DS, which is a third, unique, different game from the last 2. No, This is a fourth game called Dogs 2, this one for the GBA. 2 years after the release of the game that caused this whole mess, the original GBA Dogs game got a sequel. Which is interesting, because it does not have a sequel. Like I said, Dogs was just the Japanese game Kawaii Koinu Wonderful translated and released as its own game. But Kawaii Koinu Wonderful doesn't have a sequel. So how is Ubisoft going to release a sequel when one doesn't exist? Well, they certainly weren't going to make their own, that's for sure! So what happened was they simply re-released Dogs 1 with an additional 6 dog breeds and a few additional customization options. Aside from that, the games play out the exact same way. No new scenarios or cutscenes. This is closer to a reissuing than it is a real game release. And you might think, well, Nintendogs did that with the Dalmatian release, which came out a year after the original 3 versions. But you know what that game wasn't called? Nintendogs 2! Heck, when I was doing research for the first 2 games, I found out this happened 3 times. Yeah, it's not just dogs and horses. Pets Bunnies is just a reskin of Hamster's Life that swapped out the hamster models for rabbits. The only reason I didn't feel like talking about that was because swapping the rabbit and hamster models would take significantly more effort than what was done with the other games. I only came into this knowing about Dogs 2. Finding out about the other 2 examples was a happy accident, emphasis on accident. This has been exhausting. Absolutely exhausting. Figuring out the history of the Pets franchise, how many games were released, how many games were the same games released over and over again. I'd really like to burn my bridge to the Pets community now. For our next game, or should I say, 8, we're treading trodden ground. As a guy who talks about video games, there are what we like to call easy targets. Everybody knows these games. Everybody laughs at them. They're the equivalent of a sitcom laugh prompt. As easy as it is to talk about them, I try my hardest to avoid them since it's really hard to bring anything new to the table. We're far past beating a dead horse. We're mugging the horse's kids for their lunch money. However, in this case, I think it's more than fair to talk about them, since it's a new angle I've never heard anybody mention before. We start with Data Design, a company started back in 1983 that needs no introduction. Shovelware games were, and never will be as prominent as they were back in the Wii era. With the huge install base of children and confused parents, the console was ripe for developers with low standards and good box art to take over. At the front of the line was Data Design. 31 games released for the Wii between 2007 and 2010. 10 games released every year. Some had popular brand names behind them, like Kawasaki, while others had licensed characters like Casper or Nickelodeon. Though, those predominantly come before the Wii era where they just couldn't stop themselves. They were trying the very same tactic used by Ubisoft and the Pets games. Release as many games as possible, as quickly and cheaply as possible, and if a few make money, we can keep doing this. What if they stop making money? You saved that bullet for a reason. At the top of this trash mountain were their 4 platforming efforts. Cozied up between the racing games and... you guessed it, Super Monkey Ball clone, there was Ninja Breadman, Anubis II, Rock'n'Roll Adventures, and Mythmaker's Trixie in Toyland. These are held up as some of the absolute worst games for the Wii. 4 extremely low-quality platformers with awful controls and nothing but 3 or 4 levels in each of them. Their strategy to minimize the damages was just to make the same mistakes across all 4. They'll get tired of complaining eventually. Playing any of these games in a row immediately gives up the ghost. These are the same game reskinned and repackaged 4 different ways. All 4 of them feature a main character with a melee swing and an upgradable ranged shot, increasing in power with every enemy you kill without taking damage. 10 total hit points from a starting 5, with an additional life coming if you fill up the bar, 8 batteries to collect to open the gate at the end of the level, flying enemies, grounded enemies, the same music, the same attack animations, the same death animations. The copying and pasting is blatant and not hidden at all. You need to have shame to feel it. I like when they actually try to do something to make each one distinct, like Anubis II having a screen nuke. See? A new thing! This thing is worth 20 extra bucks! This also only goes for the Wii version, because the PS2 versions of the same game seem to have a bit more time and care put into them. Unique music for each stage, and a few unique features, like rock and roll having the requirement of collecting enough musical things before the exit opens. This isn't better, but it's something compared to the other versions. This is actually a negative too, since the PS2 versions came out first, meaning the updated Wii versions are actually worse than their originals. Now, of course, losing sleep over the quality of Wii games I've never even seen in person would say a lot more about me than it would about the developers. I find this more funny than anything, but why are they like this? Even at their worst, Data Designs never did anything this transparent. There was always some time and effort put into each game to make them feel different, even if the quality was lacking. So there has to have been something that happened for the 4 to turn out this way. But what? Well, it turns out that these 4 games used to be one game. And after a breakdown in licensing, they decided to take that game, smash it with a hammer, and sell the shards. Ninja Breadman, Anubis II, Rock'n'Roll Adventures, which was misspelled on its own spine, great job guys, and Trixie in Toyland were originally meant to be new entries in the Zool series. If you're from America, you probably don't know what Zool is. I would know because I am and I don't. Zool was the Amiga computer's answer to Sonic the Hedgehog, a platforming mascot with attitude and a hankering for Chupa Chups. Not necessary to mention, just like saying the name. Zool was treated like a big deal when it was released, bundled with the Amiga 1200 and given rave reviews, nearly 10s across the board. After the sequel was released in 1993, the series would go dormant. The developers Gremlin restructured into Zoo Digital Publishing, and they were looking for what the next step would be for their flagship series. The answer came, just like they did, from the UK, with Data Design pitching a 3D Zool game, having a working demo with 4 level concepts, and even an animated intro to start the game with. Zoo would pass on Data Design's pitch, but with the assets and general gameplay already finished, they would decide to make the game anyway. And again, then took a break, and then again. The 4 levels pitched in that Zool demo included a candy world, an Egyptian world, a music world, and a toy world. Each one of the 4 Data Design platformers that was released was just a level theme from the cancelled Zool game released as their own game. That's why they all play the same, have the same enemies, and feature around 3 levels a game. That's because these are just levels that would have been a part of Zool 3D. Data Design took what would have been a full game and piece-fed it to you in 4 different installments. Believe it or not, this isn't the only time this has ever happened. If you're in the circles that care about Ninja Breadman, you might also remember an obscure PS1 kart racing game called Rascal Racers. It's your standard Mario Kart knockoff with nothing to set it apart besides how bad it is. You might even know about Miracle Space Racers, which follows the theme of the Data Design games, being a reskin of Rascal Racers but with a space theme. But did you know about ATV Racers? Or Airboat Racing? These are all also Rascal Racers, but with different themes for what the vehicles are. Same items, same music, same characters. The quality was carried across, which is a shame, but these are practically the same game. Drop that practically, son! These are the same game. As in, it's another game that got broken up into 4 parts. The game this was before was called Merlin Racers, and it was an actual video game. It had a Diddy Kong Racing style hub and more animated menus for picking your racers. The only problem is, it didn't release on the PlayStation 1, or the PC, or the N64, or the Saturn, or any other contemporary of that time. No, it released on a DVD player. Welcome the Nuon! Essentially a super powerful DVD player with controller support. Lasted 3 years from 2000 to 2003, and one of its killer apps was Merlin Racers. This was developed by Miracle Designs, who couldn't sniff a win if they were face down in a better developer's chair. First was backing the Jaguar with Atari carts, then the Nuon with Merlin Racers, then releasing all 4 of the previously mentioned kart racers in 2003 for the PS1, when exclusivity to the Nuon died with the console. Each one of the 4 kart racers is simply a background from Merlin Racers, repackaged and beefed up as their own game with their own arcade and tournament modes. This wouldn't work as well as it did for Ubisoft and Data Designed though, as these were the last games Miracle Design made before calling it quits, with all that was left over being a GBA port of Airboat Racing. It was probably a reskinned Digimon kart. Now earlier, when we were talking about what would be exempt from this sort of discussion, I mentioned sports games in particular as being different. I do still believe that. I think that even if the changes aren't necessary, or tangible, or even good, there are changes made to career modes, story modes, online options, and gameplay that disqualify them from being seen in the same light as a Pets game, which is literally the same game twice in a row. It might sound like I'm making a lot of excuses for sports games, but rest assured I'm not doing that. Rather, I'm just trying to make sure the attention is pointed in the right direction. The repetition of these sports games is understandable when you remember these yearly sports titles don't really apply the same standards as most games. Everybody knows the joke about sports games. People buy expensive PS5s so they can buy a FIFA, Madden, and Call of Duty game every year, never venturing out to find out what a game is like without a gun or a ball in it. If those first 2 games especially change anything about themselves between years, the casual players who don't want innovation are going to be pissed. And even if you think it might not be, those people make up the majority. They don't want a game that is radically different, that changes everything about itself. They want a comfort game. A game that they can pick up and play year after year without having to learn a bunch of new mechanics or controls. They like what they like. It's a case where the repetition is built into the genre by default. But that's not the only thing some people don't want to change. What about the people who don't want to upgrade? These are people who don't need or want the latest tech, but still want to play the latest sports games. So how do you cater to a market who doesn't want to evolve? Well, that's where a previous gen port comes in. Sports games are infamous for not taking the hint when a console has died and continue to release well after even the console manufacturer has jumped ship. Looking back at the final games released for certain consoles, and if a sports game isn't the very last, it's usually close behind. The GameCube's swan song was Madden 08. PS2 had Pro Evolution Soccer 2014. The original Xbox had Madden 09. For the last 2 years of the Xbox 360's life, all it got was new FIFAs and new Just Dances. And Cars 3, I don't fucking know! These games often lack the features of their newer gen counterparts, losing out on exclusive modes, better graphics, and are overall just a way to play something like the new game. That isn't to paint them all with the same brushes though. Sometimes devs will go out of their way to make a previous gen version more than what it could have been if they simply just gave up. WWE 2K15's big My Career mode would be exclusive to the next gen versions of the game on PS4 and Xbox One, with the last gen versions on the Xbox 360 and PS3 getting a brand new exclusive Who's Got NXT mode, highlighting exciting new wrestlers from the game's big NXT push. Madden 12 for PS2 is a crossover of modern conveniences from the newer games with modes that were removed from older games. It's the best of both worlds and is considered a highlight of the Madden series. These previous gen versions really did try, and proved that there is a higher standard than no standard at all. These, however, are the exception for a reason. More often, a previous gen version of a sports game is just whatever the last version they cared about dolled up to look newer. And oftentimes, not even that. This is where what's called legacy titles come in. Legacy titles are the names used by EA for their previous gen versions that have something in common. Everything. Legacy Edition games are marketed exactly as what they are. The same game released as before. The same gameplay innovations from previous games without any new developments or significant enhancements, as well as no new game modes. You think I'm joking? This is a direct quote from the store page of one of these Legacy Edition games. They want you to know this is the same game as before. This isn't a practice that's begun recently. In fact, a practice like this was done by industry bums Midway all the way back in 1998 with their Wayne Gretzky hockey games. Wayne Gretzky 3D hockey? Well received. A well-done 3D hockey game that made a name for itself on the N64, which was at no shortage of good sports games. Wayne Gretzky 3D Hockey 98, a worse version of the exact same game, down to the music and sound effects not even being changed. Olympic Hockey Nagano 98, the literal exact same game as 98, except instead of teams from the NHL, it was teams from the 98 Olympic Games. This game has the lowest score IGN has ever given out, with a flat 0 out of 10. Keep IGN in mind, they're not getting their coats on just yet. I set myself up with a bit of an impossible task when trying to talk about the Legacy Edition games, because what is there to say? To play one is to play every one released for a console after they switched from standard releases to Legacy Editions. They stagnate and become stale to the point of parody. Everyone who says people who buy sports games are buying the same game every year get their points proven when you look at the fact these games are made at all. The only thing that sees any actual significant change is who's on which team and what clothes they're wearing. The kits are the only thing that see actual changes from one game to the next. No adding a game mode or anything, no. But this time, his socks are black, and the stripes are thinner. It's really hard to not feel like a fucking rube when these pictures get lined up like this. EA's stance on their infinite money glitch boils down to, we'll stop making them when they stop making us money. That's why the Wii stopped getting new games after FIFA 15. Same game the Vita stopped getting new games on, despite only being a few years old at the time of release. The FIFA games on Vita really exemplify what their stance on these games are. They tried one original game with FIFA 12 on the Vita, and then phoned it in for the rest. FIFA sales on Vita were just so low, they couldn't justify spending the time to port the games, and just made Legacy Editions instead. These have been coming out ever since FIFA 13, and you probably had no idea if you weren't into sports games. And even then, you probably still didn't know. You might have seen them advertised at the bottom of a trailer, but other than that, they weren't advertising these things, you just knew they were coming out. Because they were new FIFA games, they always come out. They were never advertised, barely reviewed, only really regarded by the people who knew they were coming out and knew what they were getting themselves into. It didn't matter they were the same game, it had a new number on the front, that means they had to buy it. They superficially update themselves in just the right way that the people who are going to buy these games will be satisfied. They want to play with the most up-to-date version of the team they follow, so if they look like that in the game, sold! For years, this flew under the radar until EA flew too close to the sun with the Switch editions of FIFA 20, 21, 22, and 23. On paper, the Switch is a great fit for FIFA. Its lower price tag, portability, and casual audience meant that it's among the most likely consoles for somebody who isn't a hardcore gamer to own. If you have kids, you now have an excuse to buy FIFA. The main thing holding it back, though, is the tech. The Switch has never been a powerhouse machine, and the process of porting games to it has given everybody who tried it trouble. So, if developers who care about making a good Switch port can't do it, what chance does FIFA have? FIFA on Switch decided to ditch the Frostbite engine used in the modern console ports, and instead reverted to the Ignite engine, an in-house engine used by EA for the FIFA games up to 16, with 17 ushering in the Frostbite engine. That means FIFA 18 on the Switch is more in line with the 2-year-old game FIFA 16, and lacked features that were available in that game, let alone the ports it shared its name with. FIFA 19 tried to fix that, but now, only 2 years into the Switch's life, EA completely gave up. The very next release, FIFA 20, would be a Legacy Edition, a largely unchanged version of FIFA 19, except for how blue the blue team's shirts were, and how many low-taper fades could be on one team. FIFA 21 was another Legacy Edition, a version that didn't change a single thing or add in a new feature to the game. FIFA 22? Again, there was nothing separating one from the next. Lower the opacity, overlay them, and you got the same thing. This is the most egregious they've ever gotten. Giving up on a console after 2 games and releasing reheated leftovers for the rest of the console's lifespan. And this was the Switch! The console that nearly outsold the PS4 and Xbox One combined! Second best-selling console in history, and EA couldn't have tried any less to make something. Even if the tech is undeniably inferior, how small could the FIFA player base on Switch have been for them to have given up so soon into the console's life? They'd make console-specific ports for earlier FIFA games on the Wii, an undeniably weaker console that outsold its competitors by a comfortable margin. Why couldn't they have done that now? The fact that this was all EA could muster for the Switch didn't go unnoticed like previous Legacy Editions did, as this is where we drag IGN back in. Imagine Sorry, force of habit, we're on the same side this time. After the release of FIFA 20, and the embarrassment of releasing a $60 shirt swap for the teams, the expectations for what could have been next were at an all-time low. And when even those couldn't be met, IGN reviewer Simon Cardy decided to do something unprecedented. For his review of FIFA 21, he simply took his review of FIFA 20, changed the number, and then reposted it out of protest for the game's unacceptably low quality. The next 2 years would see Simon returning to write the reviews for 22 and 23, and while they weren't copy-pastes, that's actually the much more merciful option than what he did. People say that IGN is allergic to giving low scores. Well, it turns out that the 2s and below are just saved for the exceptionally bad games that are legitimate scams. So you may ask, what about FIFA 24? Well, I'd tell you about it, but it's not real. In 2023, EA lost the license to make FIFA games and shifted over to a new original series called EA Sports FC, with FC 2024 releasing in place of a FIFA game. And, believe it or not, they did it! EA actually made a new game with new stuff in it! FC 24 was more in line with the other versions than ever before, and managed to be twice as good as any of the previous FIFA games.